opt for the class.
Jai. Nice to have you with us.
Nice to be with you all.
Okay. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajikacharya Ashtotar Sata Shri Srimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Brinda Ki Jai, Namacharya Haridas Thakur Ki Jai, Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai, Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shyamakund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai, Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Navadip Dham ki jai, Ganga Mai ki jai, Jamuna Mai ki jai, Bhakti Devi ki jai, Tulsi Devi ki jai, Samaveta Bhaktavinda ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol. Welcome everyone for Caitanya-caritamrta reading with His Holiness Jayadvaita Swami. And friends, tonight Maharaj is not going to be with us. And Sir Bikunj Mata posted something earlier in the chat, which if you're tuning in late, you may have missed, saying that she's going to be unable to read this evening. And that includes me as well. Our usual host, Mahesh Pandit Prabhu, is now in Vrindavan. So we're down to a small but fiercely committed following. We're in the 7th chapter of the Adi Lila. And someone would have to remind me exactly which verse we are on. It's somewhere around text number 46. I can usually count on Mahesh Pandit Prabhu to be right on top of the verse number, but he's not going to be able to serve that function today. So Sir Bikunj Mata says she thinks it's 49.
I'm looking it up real quick. It's the 21st was the last class, so I'll look in the chat and see what's there.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Anyway, welcome everyone for being here. It is Thursday, September 28th, 2023.
49 is correct.
Jai.
And Dana says she agrees, and thank you very much, both of you. So I will get that up on the screen and we can read it. What's the chapter?
Chapter 7.
7. Okay. 749. Okay. Does somebody want to read it first, or I can go ahead right now? There it is. Okay. I'll kick it off. Iti madhye Chandrasekhar Mishra Tapana Dukhihana Prabhupaya Kaile Nivedana, not Dhana. While Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was instructing Sanatana Goswami, both Chandrasekhar and Tapan Mishra became very unhappy. Therefore, they submitted an appeal unto the lotus feet of the Lord. There's no purport for that. I'll read the next one. Katika sunibe Prabhu tomara nidana napari sahite ebe chadiba jivana. How long can we tolerate the blasphemy by your critics against your conduct? We should give up our lives rather than hear such blasphemy. Purport. One of the most important instructions by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu regarding regular Vaishnava behavior is that a Vaishnava should be tolerant like a tree and submissive like grass. Trinadapi sunichena taroriva sahishnuna tamanina manadena kirtaniya sadahari. One should chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than the straw in the street. One should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige and ready to offer all respect to others. In such a state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. Nevertheless, the author of these instructions, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, did not tolerate the misbehavior of Jagai and Madai. When they harmed Lord Nityananda Prabhu, he immediately became angry and wanted to kill them, and it was only by the mercy of Lord Nityananda Prabhu that they were saved. One should be very meek and humble in his personal transactions, and if insulted, a Vaishnava should be tolerant and not angry. But if there is blasphemy against one's guru or another Vaishnava, one should be as angry as fire. This was exhibited by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. One should not tolerate blasphemy against a Vaishnava, but should immediately take one of three actions. If someone blasphemes a Vaishnava, one should stop him with arguments and higher reason. If one is not expert enough to do this, he should give up his life on the spot. And if he cannot do this, he must go away. While Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was in Benares or Kashi, the Mayavadi sannyasis blasphemed him in many ways because although he was a sannyasi, he was indulging in chanting and dancing. Tapan Mishra and Chandrasekhar heard this criticism, and it was intolerable for them because they were great devotees of Lord Chaitanya. They could not stop it, however, and therefore they appealed to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu because this blasphemy was so intolerable that they had decided to give up their lives. Om Jnana-timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. And I would like to ask Panchatattva to say something, to speak first.
I was expecting you to say something, but I'll say something. I relate this verse to our contemporary times and think that the admonitions still apply, that one must be very careful about hearing Vaishnava Aparad. And of course, we have the increased digital facility of the internet and so many other forms of social media to broadcast both the glories of the Lord and things that should not be heard by anyone. So we had to be really careful. Also, we should be on guard that we think that we have to jump at every occurrence that we come across of blasphemy of the Lord's devotees. More often than not, at least according to my own experience, the best thing to do is to walk away and not ever be involved with such people. Not think that if I take a stand against this person and, chastise them severely and defeat them, that they're going to bend to my will. In previous ages, perhaps, when one was defeated by logic and argument or by evidence from Shastra, the defeat was accepted because the person had some sort of semblance of good character. But that type of good character, especially when taken into when you take into consideration the person is engaged in blasphemy of a Vaishnava, that kind of character doesn't exist. So even in to give a mundane example, my wife told me from her martial arts training that again and again it was emphasized that you find yourself in a position where you are being attacked or there's a threat. Your very first path of conduct should be to get away from there. Right. You should run. You should just get away from it. Don't engage. If you have to engage, that's another matter. But it's not that that kind of training gives you a license to engage in all kinds of fighting, as is the nature of film and media that you see regarding the martial arts. It's an extremely mundane example, but there's so much activity now that's easily accessible and easily broadcast through social media and the internet that one must be very careful to avoid it, because it's so poisonous hearing the blasphemy and undue criticism of Vaishnavas that even if you think that you're above it, you can be tarnished by it. Your consciousness can be affected by it. It's poison. So I strongly feel that it should be avoided at all costs.
Thank you. It reminds me of two things. One is, when you say it's poison, that's definitely true. You may not have a desire to swallow poison, but if somehow it's around you and you're exposed to it, it can have an effect unless you are very, very strong. And I wanted to share an example from my own life. This very nice devotee, senior devotee, Prabhupada disciple, told me once, and this was many years ago, I was still in New Bhaktin, very new. And she told me of something that she was distributing books, and she showed someone a picture of Prabhupada. And this person said something very offensive about Prabhupada. And when she told me that, I literally felt as if I had been poisoned, in the sense of, like you eat, you start to get food poisoning and you start to feel sick, and at the same time you're helpless against it. And to this day, that that statement that person made, that she told me very innocently, not trying to poison me, she was just repeating what someone else said. It's like a little tumor in my spiritual life. That I there's a part of me that it has latched onto, you know, and I have to be conscious of it, because it's like I was new, and it made an impression on me, and that impression, it hasn't gone away, because they say when you're a neophyte, your faith is soft. And so when something's soft, like you put your hand in wet cement, it makes an impression. That's why we're supposed to protect neophyte. The idea is, with a neophyte, is a new plant, you put a fence around it so that the elephants cannot trample it. So just by merely repeating what somebody said offensively, it had an effect on me. And I wish to God she had never said that to me, because it would not have occurred to me, you know? And it's it's just so dangerous. Sometimes we think, just in the case of making, that's why when devotees, they say, oh, other things that we won't mention. Why? Because what has been heard cannot be unheard. Once it goes into your mind, it's there. It's there. So we have to be very careful what we say. Even in the case of making a point or whatever, have to be so careful. And Lord knows I'm not careful with my mouth, but I'm a lot more careful than I could be, because I know that words can kill. Words can kill. And what you were saying about Vaishnava opera too, it reminds me. I think someone, we have the example of Dhruva, not Dhruva, Dhruva Maharaj, yeah, who is, his disrespected by his mother, and you know, and what a price they had to pay. What a price they had to pay, just because she was offensive to this devotee before he was actually even a devotee. And I won't quote the name, I won't say the name of the sannyasi, but he says, you shouldn't offend anybody because they may become a devotee. And then what's your position? So we have to be so careful, so careful. And I know anything that bad that happens in my life, any suffering that I undergo, I often feel like I have committed some offense. I don't know how I can rectify it, but this is why I'm suffering. Like when the whole pandemic came, Krishna can do so many things with one action. And I was like, I must have committed some offense, because here I am stuck, without devotee association. So anyways, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you for your comments. Very well taken.
Thank you. I was also thinking that there are different types of reactions, and also the response you take can depend upon the strength of your own Vaishnav, the strength of your own spiritual advancement. Prabhupada could, with sound logic, reasoning and arguments, and higher reason, as is mentioned here, defeat such, attacks on Vaishnavas, what to speak of attacks on Krishna. He could defeat them roundly and soundly. But those of us who are not so advanced have to take great care, and that has to be taken into consideration. The other thing I was thinking about is this verse, Trinadapi Sanichena. We chant it a lot, we hear it a lot, but it's deep. It's a very deep verse, and the qualities that are being called for chanting the holy names of the Lord are very, very exalted qualities. To be that humble, to actually feel oneself that, insignificant, and to be that tolerant, to have no sense of false prestige. I'm so far away from that, I can't even imagine what that's like. But I chant that verse practically daily, thinking, oh boy, I hope I can develop these qualities. And I chant Hare Krishna, hoping I can develop those qualities, because this is what's required for chanting the holy name of the Lord constantly. That's the requirement. That state of mind is the requirement for chanting Hare Krishna. We have a nice sannyasi that's staying at our home right now, His Holiness Jayadvaita Swami. And he's such a simple Vaishnava. He has some health issues. He's getting very elderly. But I can tell you, the holy name of the Lord is always on his tongue. Always on his tongue. And it's very wonderful quality. And he, meets with the devotees. He's worked with the youth over the years a lot and so forth. It's not like all he's done is chant Hare Krishna. But his focus, his main interest is chanting Hare Krishna. And it shows. He's an effulgent devotee. He shows a lot of spiritual advancement, and it's very enlivening to have his association. And of course, there are other devotees. Jayadvaita Swami, so many devotees that they've developed over many, many years. That's another thing. And I think about devotees, and I think about Vaishnavas and ISKCON. These guys aren't beginners. They've been chanting 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And they've been engaged in preaching activities, outreach, and service upon service upon service. Sometimes the Vaishnavas of the West are maligned because, well, you're going to have to take another birth in a Hindu family in India before you can actually become a real Vaishnava. That's a bunch of malarkey, and that's Vaishnava aparat.
Yes. I just typed in the chat box what it's total dedication. Anyways, what else is there for them? They've given everything in this life from a young age for Guru and Krishna. So why would they have to take birth in the material world again unless they're part of Krishna's pastimes? If they don't want anything left in this material world, why would they? You know what I mean? It's like even in the best families, you're still in a material situation. So you're going to have some desires and whatever, and yeah, you can dovetail them and what have you, but if you really don't want anything else, then why would you have to take birth in a material situation? However, fortunate. So, anyways.
And there's the Krishna factor.
Mm-hmm.
If such a devotee is constantly meditating on the service of his spiritual master in Krishna, are we to assume that Krishna is not noticing that his spiritual master has not noticed that Krishna doesn't want him to come back home, back to Godhead, or be engaged further in some pure devotional service somewhere for some purpose? Anyway. I'm very privileged to know a number of devotees that I consider highly advanced. And I know for sure that when Prabhupada told the devotees, he was very specific about it. He said, if you follow the 4 regular principles and you chant 16 rounds, I guarantee you will go back to Godhead. That's what he said. Now, these devotees, they're doing those things and so much service. And someone is going to suggest that they're not going back to Godhead, or they're going to have to wait a few hundred lifetimes, or come on, give me a break.
That quote you said of Prabhupada says, I guaranteed, I was thinking of that exact one, and I was trying to find the exact quote. He started off saying, if you do this, this, and that, you will go back to Godhead, I guarantee it. And then he started saying, even if you only do this, and he kept reducing it, Yeah. And I forget it, I'll see if I can find it. But he was basically he made it as easy as it can get,
Yeah.
Thank you. Shall we move on to the next verse? Or did you have anything more to say on this purport? So, okay, so we have a pretty full group here. Would anybody like to read next, such as Dana Mataji? Do you go by Dana or Dana?
It doesn't matter. Everybody calls me different, but it's fine either way. And is it 51 that we're at?
50. Oh wait, sorry, is it I lost my place here.
51.
51. Sorry, yeah, I read 49 and 50.
Tomer Nityayata Sanyasiragana Shunitena Paripate Vidya Shiravana. Translation. The Mayavadi sannyasis are all criticizing your holiness. We cannot tolerate hearing such criticism, for this blasphemy breaks our hearts. Purport. This is a manifestation of real love for Krishna and Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. There are categories of Vaishnavas. Kanishta Adhikaris, Madhyama Adhikaris, and Uttama Adhikaris. The Kanishta Adhikari, or the devotee in the lowest stage of Vaishnava life, has firm faith, but is not familiar with the conclusions of the Shastras. The devotee in the second stage, the Madhyama Adhikari, is completely aware of the Shastric conclusion and has firm faith in his Guru and the Lord. He therefore, avoiding non-devotees, preaches to the innocent. However, the Mahabhagavata, or Uttama Adhikari, the devotee in the highest stage of devotional life, does not see anyone as being against the Vaishnava principles, for he regards everyone as a Vaishnava but himself. This is the essence of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's instruction that one be more tolerant than a tree and think oneself lower than the straw on the street. Trinad api sunichena tarir eva sahisnuna. However, even if a devotee is in the Uttama Bhagavata status, he must come down to the second status of life, Madhyama Adhikar, to be a preacher. For a preacher should not tolerate blasphemy against another Vaishnava. Although a Kanista Adhikar also cannot tolerate such blasphemy, he is not competent to stop it by citing shastric evidences. Therefore, Tapana Mishriya and Chandrashikara are understood to be Kanishta Adhikars because they cannot refute the arguments of the sannyasis in Banaras. They appealed to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to take action, for they felt that they could not tolerate such criticism, although they also could not stop it. Apologize for any mispronunciations. Trying.
Thank you.
These are really interesting points that are being made here regarding a response to blasphemy of a Vaishnava. The opponents of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, namely Prakashananda Saraswati and his followers, were seeing Lord Chaitanya from their own position as impersonalist Mayavadi sannyasis. And they were thinking that he's a sentimentalist, he must not know very much, he's just dancing and singing these, and using terms to describe Lord Chaitanya that would signify a low-class person. So Tapana Mishra and Chandrasekhar were feeling very, very upset, but because they were not qualified in terms of their knowledge of the Shastra and their advancement in Krishna consciousness to refute the arguments of the sannyasis, they made an appeal to Lord Chaitanya himself. So that's another point for consideration. I still stick to my point before, though, that offenses against devotees can be so severe and so plentiful under different circumstances that it would be very wise to avoid hearing them, what to speak of engaging in lengthy debates with persons who will refuse to be budged by any amount of logic or reasoning.
It also saves us from making fools of ourselves. I remember one time my husband and I were reading with another devotee, and he was a very humble devotee. And I didn't really know him very well, and he just started coming to read with us. And I thought to myself, he wasn't initiated. And I thought, oh, we know people, that they haven't made the full commitment yet. And, I made a lot of assumptions about him. And then he started reading and speaking. And I was thinking, it's a good thing I didn't speak and betray any of my mentality, because I would have felt like the biggest fool in my life, because he was extremely, compared to me, advanced and knowledgeable and whatever. But because he was so humble, nobody could really see it, at first. It was evident by his service attitude, but his learning wasn't evident by his service attitude, because he did very humble service. So we have to be really careful what we, even what we, I mean, I only embarrassed myself to myself. But if I hadn't, it would have been quite calamitous. So yeah, it's part of being humble, isn't it? To control one's speech and one's mentality, around Vaishnavas, because we have to make the assumption that everyone is more advanced than us, don't we? I mean, isn't that the hallmark of a very advanced Vaishnava, that they think everyone is serving Krishna and except me? So if we at least act that way, even if we don't believe it, we don't get ourselves in trouble.
I'm also thinking of something that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said about devotees, even that, a pujari who's ringing the bell for the deities is better than all the altruist philanthropists and, various persons doing all kinds of humanitarian works, what to speak of Mayavadis. Anyway, these, even though Tapana Mishra and Chandrasekhar are described here as being understood to be Kanishta Adhikaris, because they could not refute the arguments of the sannyasis, still, they're in a better position. They were Kanishtas. They don't have faith bolstered by knowledge, but they're still devotees. And they're appealing to Lord Chaitanya to please stop the criticisms of these Mayavadi sannyasis, even though we don't know how to do it ourselves.
Yes. Shall we move on to the next verse?
Yeah, Yoganananda would like to read, if that's all right.
Okay, sure. Text 52.
You'll have to come over here.
It's okay. Here. Can you hear me from here?
I can hear you fine. Everybody
Okay.
else?
Hiya suni rade prabhu isat hasiya sekale eka bripa miliya asiya. While Tapana Mishra and Chandrasekhar were thus talking with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he only smiled slightly and remained silent. At that time, a Brahmana came there to meet the Lord. Purport. Because the blasphemy was cast against Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, he did not feel sorry, and therefore he was smiling. This is ideal Vaishnava behavior. One should not become angry upon hearing criticism of himself. But if other Vaishnavas are criticized, one must be prepared to act as previously suggested. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was very compassionate for his pure devotees, Tapana Mishra and Chandrasekhar. Therefore, by his grace, this Brahmana immediately came to him. By his omnipotency, the Lord created this situation for the happiness of his devotees. So, this ideal Vaishnava behavior, one should not become angry upon hearing criticism of himself. That's definitely not me. Says it, why? Any other comment for someone?
Another story from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was, and I don't remember the details, but some person who had been opposed to him in many different ways and criticized him heavily over the years had passed away. And when Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur heard about it, he became very sad. He said, "This man was actually my my well-wisher. By his criticisms, I've benefited enormously. He felt the loss of of this critic.
I remember reading that when this critic had passed away, that Bhaktisiddhanta's Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's disciples were expressing pleasure or, relief at the very least, I imagine. And he was like, no, he was my friend, you know.
Yeah.
So that even highlights the difference, they were happy. I mean, I guess in one sense it was a good thing that they were happy because he was criticizing their spiritual master, but Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's position was to not be happy, and so both were behaving appropriately, I guess, for their positions.
Yeah, and he was the Thakur was teaching his disciples by his reaction as well, that don't regard those who criticize you as great offenders. It isn't the mood of a Vaishnava.
I was thinking how sometimes when people criticize us, just in ordinary dealings, let's say we have some flaw that we're aware of, and somebody criticizes us for it, we get angry, even though they're telling the truth, because we don't like to have our flaws exposed. But for instance, if or let's say insecurities, if somebody says, they say something about us that we know isn't true, it just sort of rolls off. We think, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. But it seems like with a Vaishnava, any criticism, because of their humility, they say, yes, that's true. And because of their humility, they accept it. Yes, this person has seen me, this person. So it's like devotees more in touch with reality. They accept criticism because they're aware of their own flaws, either whether out of humility or just, realism. But in general, most people, they want to hide their flaws. They don't like people recognizing their flaws because they're in denial. They're not in touch with reality because they want to be seen as better than they are instead of as they are.
Praveen is asking something in the chat box.
Let's see. Okay. How do we understand that someone is criticizing a devotee or calling a spade a spade? That's a good question.
I think there are a few considerations. Sometimes, like, in a devoted community, someone will be acting inappropriately or, causing a disturbance. But then you have, typically you have some sort of chain of command. You have spiritual authorities in the community, the temple president, etc., or the local governing body commissioner or whatever. So there's a way to address those kinds of issues.
The senior.
Yeah, it's a matter for senior devotees. You have to also police your own heart. Am I seeing the flaws or faults of this devotee because I have my own issues, my own likes and dislikes? I think it was Jayadvaita Swami who gave that example of that devotee that used to rub him the wrong way all the time. And then he saw how Prabhupada was really appreciating his service. So there was some reciprocation with Prabhupada. And he thought, oh my gosh, Prabhupada really likes him. I should like him too. So, sometimes again, I think to protect our own devotional creepers, we have to be very reluctant to find fault with anyone. And you can see Lord Chaitanya's position as his exemplary behavior as a topmost Vaishnava, because even though things were being said about him that would disturb and anger anyone else in that position, he was simply smiling. So that's also a sign of a truly advanced devotee. Regarding calling a spade, well,
That's amazing.
Sometimes the temple is described as a kind of a hospital. You know, you have patients that are taking the medicine, prasadam, and the holy name, and associating. And sometimes things can be a little rough or difficult in a devotee community between devotees, but it shouldn't require it shouldn't require meditating upon the flaws of someone else. Generally, devotees try to meditate upon their good qualities of others and encourage those qualities. Prabhupada did that to such an extent that he elevated so many people from the lowest position to the position of a devotee simply by accentuating the good and either remediating or waiting patiently for a purification to come for the bad. So calling a spade is there, but that generally is the province of persons who are in charge, persons who are guiding the younger devotees in a community. They're the ones who have that. I think Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati described it as, you know, a kind of a thankless task. You know, there's a famous address that he makes. Basically, just kind of, everyone is going to see me as a big, you know, who's this big, you know, puffed up fellow sitting on the Vyasasana, and so. But he said that, you know, this is my duty. My duty is to rectify my disciples and give them guidance. So when it's duty, that's fine. But when it's not your duty, don't be calling spades. Be chanting Hare Krishna.
I also think calling spade of spade, sort of like reminds me of two rough stones. You rub each other the wrong way, eventually you get smooth if you stay in devotional service. And another thing I was thinking of humility. We're supposed to be the servant of the servant and become very humble, but when I have that fear that you try to be humble and you try to practice humility, but then you get taken advantage of. So how do you deal with that?
In the chat box, my husband has written, well, I'm just going to mention, everybody can read it if they like, but there's from the purport of Bhagavad Gita 10, chapter 10, text 4 and 5, Prabhupada talks about speaking the truth, whether it's unpalatable or not, but it requires discrimination and also authority. And my husband writes in the chat, in response to Praveen Krishna Prabhu and Panchatattva Prabhu, criticism is appropriate when coming from a legitimate chain of command, spiritual authorities. Also, according to His Holiness Jayadvaita Swami, if there is a need for correction, the question is whether those seeing a fault have taken the trouble to show love and concern to whomever may be in need of correction. In such an atmosphere of genuine love and concern, there's a greater chance of inculcating a desire for rectification.
Yeah.
That's true. It's natural, because when you show love and concern for somebody, then your subordinates want to please you. So when they tell you you have done something not right, the desire to want to please them makes you think, oh, I need to change, I need to rectify. So yeah, it's a good point. I was just remembering another story. Some woman one time wrote to Prabhupada. Her name was Lynn something, I can't remember now. But she was, you know, she was probably approached by a couple of fired up brahmacharis, and she said that they were unloving. And Prabhupada wrote back to her, and he was so apologetic, but at the same time, he was very loyal to his disciples. He didn't say that they were bad and that he would, you know, punish them, or, you know, that they're, you know, what do they know? He made an allowance for them. He says there's, you know, they're fighting against this material energy, and so they have to be, you know, protective of themselves, you know. And I just always appreciated Prabhupada's loyalty towards his own disciples when other people were criticizing, because Prabhupada understood, you know, what does he say? You're declaring war on the material energy, you know, and so we should have that kind of respect for any devotee, you know, even the ones that don't seem like they're the highest caliber. They've done something that hardly anybody does, and we should be loyal and respect them.
There's
And I think you said that before.
yeah, there's There's something to be said, I guess, for having experienced life with the non-devotees, having, of course, been a non-devotee, in many cases still being one, that because when you live in a devotee community and you tend to restrict your association of the non-devotees, if you become a little too familiar, you can make the mistake of seeing devotees in a mundane light after some time, because they're going through their process of purification. The holy name is on their lips, and they're starting to see some of the things in their own hearts and dealing with different things, and they're patients in a hospital. So, but if you sometimes I think Krishna makes the arrangement for devotees who want to see, actually quite often, I'm sure, for devotees who want to see other devotees in a mundane light, to go back out again into the material world and see what non-devotees are like, what their anartas are, how bad their association is, how difficult it is to be with persons who aren't even trying to develop their Krishna consciousness. Sometimes one has to be put in that position to finally come to some sane position and not be overly familiar with Vaishnavas and just start counting their flaws or counting their apparent mistakes, because without their association, we're nothing. Even the most junior Vaishnava has so much to offer in terms of association. He chants Hare Krishna. He's trying to do some service. He may be struggling with his senses or struggling to follow the order of his guru or even to find a guru, but he's on the path, or she is on the path. And that's a much better person to be around than a person who has no interest in spiritual life, whose activities are all abominable, whose mind is full of nonsense, just full of nonsense, and you have to hear it all the time. You don't want to have to end up back in that position to be reminded that you shouldn't be rejecting devotees for their supposed faults.
I just found the letter to Lynn Ludwig, and Prabhupada says to her, this is just an excerpt. He says, kindly forgive my beloved disciples for any unkindness or indiscretion on their part. After all, to give up one's life completely for serving the Lord is not an easy thing, and Maya, or the illusory material energy, tries especially hard to again entrap those who have left her service to become devotees. Therefore, in order to withstand the attack of Maya and remain strong under all conditions of temptation, young or inexperienced devotees in the neophyte stage of devotional service will sometimes adopt an attitude against those things or persons that may possibly be harmful or threatening to their tender devotional creepers. It just makes you want to cry. It's just, he's so sweet. And I just love that he says, my beloved disciples, Thank you for expanding
Really
on that
nice.
sentiment. Yeah, I think it's in Science of Self-Realization. I'm not sure. Yeah, Science of Self-Realization, chapter 7. Shall we move on to the next text? Let me. Panchatattva Prabhu, are we on text 53?
53, yeah.
If you would like to read.
Sure. Asinivedana kare charena dhariya ekavastu magum deha prasanna hayya. The Brahmana immediately fell at the lotus feet of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and requested him to accept his proposal in a joyful mood. Purport. The Vedic injunctions state, Tadviti pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya. One must approach a superior authority in humbleness. Bhagavad Gita 4:34. One cannot challenge a superior authority. With great submission, one can submit his proposal for acceptance by the spiritual master or spiritual authorities. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is an ideal teacher by his personal behavior, and so also are all his disciples. Thus, this Brahmana, being purified in association with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, followed these principles in submitting his request to the higher authority. He fell down at the lotus feet of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and then spoke as follows.
Would either you or Yovi like to read the next verse?
I just wanted to mention that I like that Prabhupada has given this from the Bhagavad Gita, this portion of a verse as a Vedic injunction. It's great. The Bhagavad Gita is full of such Vedic injunctions.
Sakala Sanyasi Muni Kainu Nimantrana Tumeyadi Isa Purnahaya Moramana. My dear Lord, I've invited all the sannyasis of Benares to my home. My desires will be fulfilled if you also accept my invitation. Purport. This Brahmana knew that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was the only Vaishnava sannyasis in Benares at that time, and all the others were Mayavadis. It is a duty of a grihastha to sometimes invite sannyasis to take food at his home. This grihastha Brahmana wanted to invite all the sannyasis to his house, but he also knew that it would be very difficult to induce Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to accept such an invitation because the Mayavadi sannyasis would be present. Therefore, he fell down at his feet and fervently appealed to the Lord to be compassionate and grant his request. Thus, he humbly submitted his desire. Any comments?
This reminded me of how Prabhupada's father would, welcome any sannyasi into his home as a sannyasi, even if they weren't, topmost Vaishnavas, and ask for blessings. But now I'm not sure if I'm remembering incorrectly. Didn't he have wasn't he sort of reluctant also if they weren't Vaishnavas? I'm not remembering so well.
No, he was accepting all types of sadhus.
There's one story where right at the end of his life, his desire, well, no, this was later pastimes. He wasn't at the verge of leaving his body, Gaur Mohanday, but he was living in Prabhupada was living there. And Prabhupada had invited one of his godbrothers from the Gaudiya Math, a sannyasi, to speak. And he invited his father to come and hear the discourse. And his father begrudgingly came down, having had so many less than pristine examples of sadhus. And he was very skeptical and kind of maybe a little harsh and maybe even a little critical and not offering the kind of respect you might expect. And then as soon as the sannyasi began to speak, Gaur Mohanday just fell at his feet crying, "I'm sorry, I didn't know you were a Vaishnava sannyasi. Please forgive me."
Nice story.
Seeing everyone as a devotee.
Shall we end here, and Panchatattva Prabhu, you can lead Kirtan?
Sure. Were there any other comments in the chat? Or?
I'm not seeing any.
I made a comment. I considered how great that Brahmana was who invited all the sannyasis of Benares, because he was so instrumental in this pastime of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
That's such a good point, because sometimes all you have to do is provide the environment for something incredible to happen, just to have the place, to set up the place where that could happen. Otherwise, where would it have happened?
Yeah. Yeah,
Instrumental
wonderful.
is a good word.
Yeah, we have such great personalities showing up in Krishna book and in the Caitanya-caritamrta and so forth, and they don't even have a particular name attached to them, but they're quite extraordinary.
Praveen Prabhu says in the chat, although being a Vaishnava, he also invited the Mayavadis. Wasn't it the case, though, that pretty much only Mayavadis were sannyasis at that time? Because Mahaprabhu took sannyas from a Mayavadi in the Mayavadi line. And Srila Prabhupada himself says you should show respect even to Mayavadi sannyasis. So
Yep.
if that's what you've got in your neighborhood, I guess that's who you invite.
But we are cautioned not to hear from them.
Yeah. Well, we live in different times now. There are no roaming sannyasis knocking at our doors. Hardly. Thank you, everyone, for reading. Prabhu, whenever you're ready, you can chant.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Privraja Kacharya Astotra Sata Shri Shrimad, His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Privraja Kacharya Astotra Sata Shri Shrimad, His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Brinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Govinas Shyamakund Radhakund Girivardhan Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Navadvip Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai. Gangamayi Ki Jai. Jamunamayi Ki Jai. Shrimati Tulasi Devi Ki Jai. Shrimati Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Samabeta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees. Gaura Premanande, Hari Hari Bol.
Hari Hari Bol.
Thank you so much, Panchatattva Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you to
And-
everyone who read and commented. And
Yes.
And at least here in the eastern seaboard or the Midwest, or I don't know how it goes according to the Vaishnav calendar, but today's the, if I'm not mistaken, the disappearance day of Srila Haridas Thakur. Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai.
Jai.
Shri Caitanya-caritamrta Ki Jai.
Jai.
Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Jai.
Jayadvaita Maharaj and friends Ki Jai.
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 Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda
Jai.
Ki
Bhaktivinoda Ki
Jai.
Jai.
I was just going to say it.
We should all say it together. Ready? Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai.
Hare Krishna.
May we
Thank
all
you.
be Samaveta once again very soon.
Jai.
Jai. Thank you all. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna,
Hare
Dana, Hare Krishna. Haribol, Krishna Konteya Prabhu.
Safe driving, Prabhuji.
Thank you. Thank you. We're somewhere in Tennessee.
Hmm.